Never have I ever had a threesome. Jack had his glass raised before he'd even finished the sentence. He took a long, noisy gulp of beer, making sure both me and Jenny were watching. I didn't drink, just glanced over at Jenny and rolled my eyes. She shook her head in response. Jack, you haven't had a threesome. I have. No, you haven't. There isn't even one girl on campus stupid enough to sleep with you, let alone two. Jack put his pint down and grinned. Don't be jealous, Jenny. I'm sure you'll find someone soon. I can't be jealous of something that never happened, can I? Ask those two freshers if it never happened, if you're so sure. Oh yeah? And where would I find them exactly? Just look for the two most satisfied girls on campus. Jack picked up his pint and winked. They'll be more than happy to confirm the story. I snorted. Couldn't help myself. Jack might have been a dick, but he always made me laugh. He made Jenny laugh too, even if she didn't always like to show it. The three of us had been in a flat together in our first year of university, and by December, we'd already signed up to share a house for our second year. We made the decision fast, giddy with the honeymoon stage of our new friendship. But now, I wondered if we'd been a bit too quick. We still got on well and had a laugh together, but I noticed Jack and Jenny started to grate on each other lately, and their grating ended up grating on me. Looking at the frown on Jenny's face after Jack's last comment, I decided to intervene, calm things down before the night took a turn for the worse. Hang on a minute, mate. You can't drink on your own turn, can you? Surely that defeats the point of saying never have I ever. Jack looked back at me with wide, innocent eyes. Sure you can. I checked the rules. You checked the rules? Yeah, I googled them before we came out. There's no way that you Google the rules of never have I ever before we... He's right, you know. The voice cut me off mid-flow. All three of us looked around at the same time. The girl standing next to our table wasn't anyone I recognized. She was short and blonde, with bright green eyes and a half smile on her face. I'd never seen her around before. Judging by the looks of confusion on Jack's and Jenny's faces, they didn't recognize her either. The three of us shared a quick, confused glance while the girls stood there. It was Jack who recovered first. You see, guys, I told you I'd look them up. He turned back to the blonde girl. Sorry, I don't think we've met before. I'm Jack. That's Max over there, and the ray of sunshine opposite me is Jenny. Jenny scowled. Are you... Jack glanced around the crowded bar, searching for the right words. Are you with anyone, or... No, I'm waiting. Later, I'd think back to that sentence. The oddness of it. Not I'm waiting for my housemates, or I'm waiting for friends. Just, I'm waiting. But at the same time, the thought didn't even cross my mind. I just assumed the girl was waiting for people she knew to arrive, and had overheard our conversation while passing by our table. I guess all of us assumed that. Well, feel free to wait with us and play a few rounds if you want, Jack was saying now. These two keep ganging up on me, and I could use someone on my side. What did you say your name was? Okay, thanks. I'll stick around for a while. The girl smiled at Jack. She brushed a lock of blonde hair from her forehead as she took a seat opposite me. I saw Jack's grin widen. I snuck a glance at Jenny and saw her sitting back in a seat, arms folded, face unreadable. Well, we go round clockwise and I just had my turn, said Jack. So I guess that means it's your go. The blonde girl flicked her eyes from Jack to me. I felt a small shiver in my stomach. Her eyes were large and pixie-ish, an unusual shade of green. The poetry books I read for my English lit course would have had a lot to say about eyes like that. I glanced down at my pint, suddenly a bit embarrassed, hoping my face wasn't turning red. I was still staring at the table when the girl spoke. Never have I ever woken up in an empty house. I looked back up, my embarrassment gone as quickly as it had come. never have I ever woken up in an empty house. What was that about? Never have I ever might not have been the best drinking game at uni, but I'd yet to meet a student who hadn't played it before. Everyone had. It was the kind of time-killing game you played when you didn't have a pack of cards or when everyone was too drunk to bother with them. And because we'd all played it, we all knew the unwritten rule. The stuff you said was always sexual. It was always something sex-related. The idea was to make a statement like Jack's one about having a threesome, then wait to see who drank. The people who drank were the ones who'd done it. I cast my mind back, trying to think of a time I'd played when it hadn't been like that. I couldn't. Jack and Jenny's silence told me they couldn't either. I glanced quickly at both of them. Jenny's previous blank face now wore a slight frown. Half confusion, half exasperation. Jack just looked like a man whose bubble had burst. But being Jack, he was also the quickest to recover. He spun his glass slowly on the table and grinned across at Jenny, who had just taken a sip from hers. "Don't try to tell me you're drinking, Jenny," he said. "You've never even woken up in an empty bed, let alone a house." "Get lost, Jack." I took a gulp of my own drink, trying to pretend I hadn't heard the edge that had crept into Jenny's voice. Jack did the same. As I put my pint down, I stole another glance at the girl sitting opposite me. Her face was impossible to read. She had a drink in front of her that I hadn't noticed before, what looked like a gin and tonic, and she was prodding at the glass with her finger. If she had any idea she'd said something the rest of us found odd, she didn't show it. The game continued. After a bit of coaxing, Jenny eventually had a turn, and then a few minutes later, I had mine. Jack went out to get another round of drinks, then came back and took his, and then it was the blonde girl's turn again. I won't describe every single turn everyone took. If I'm honest, I can't remember them all. That was the point when the night began to slide away from me, to take that subtle turn that so many of our nights out did, drifting from pleasantly tipsy to suddenly far too drunk. I remember Jack saying something about shower sex that made everyone laugh. I remember downing a pint while others chanted around me, banging the table in unison. I remember locking eyes with a blonde girl, catching a half smirk as she brushed her hair from her face. And I remember some of the things she said, some of her never have I evers. Those I do remember. While everyone else continued with the usual kind of nonsense, the girl carried on saying weird stuff, kind of creepy stuff. Sometimes it produced awkward laughter, sometimes an awkward silence. Sometimes Jack would make an innuendo. A couple of times Jenny rolled her eyes in a really obvious way, and once she pretty much burst out laughing as soon as the girl was done talking. But I never did. The girl's face remained blank whenever she spoke, and she never gave any hint that she realised she'd said something odd. I began to feel a little bad for her. But there was no denying the strangeness of the stuff she came out with. As well as I can remember, here are a few of her never have I evers. Never have I ever woken up from a nightmare I couldn't remember. Never have I ever been completely terrified without knowing why. Never have I ever refused to look in the bathroom mirror in case someone was standing behind me. Never have I ever forgotten the worst thing that ever happened to me. Never have I ever seen a shadow from the corner of my eye. By the time she came out with that last one, I was pretty far gone. I'd lost count of how long the game had been going on for and how much I'd drank. My head was spinning. My mouth felt dry. The taste of tequila I couldn't remember drinking on my tongue. I looked down and saw cluttered shot glasses on the table in front of me, limes and spilled salt. At least 6 empty pints. I went to stand up and my hip bashed the table's edge, causing the glass to rattle. "Hold up, Max is tapping out." Jack's words slurred into each other. He grinned up at me and drained his pint. "Get us another round in, mate." I edged past the back of his chair, saw Jenny sitting opposite Jack, her arms folded. Isn't it her turn to get a round in? Jenny's eyes were wide and bloodshot from booze. She stared at Jack, unblinking, the anger in her face obvious. "She," said Jack, leaning over and gripping the hand of the blonde girl, "is drinking on me." Before I was clear of the table, I made eye contact with the blonde girl one last time, her green eyes fixed on mine. She held my gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she winked. As I stumbled away from the table into the crowded bar, I remember thinking it was strange that she still only had one gin and tonic in front of her. Voices, music, packed, jumbled bodies. The rest of that night is a jigsaw puzzle with pieces missing. When I think back to it now, I'm not sure what's real and what isn't, which memories are true and which are false, conjured up by my own mind to fill in the blanks. I have a memory of squeezing my way across a crowded dance floor, the room spinning around me. Too many faces, too much light, pounding bass music filling my head. I remember aiming for the bar, but ended up in the toilet, crouched on all fours in a cubicle as I threw up burning tequila. My jeans damp from urine where I kneeled on the wet tiles. Time passed. I don't know how much. The next memory I have is of the dance floor. I was somewhere in the middle, clutching a slopping pint that kept spilling over my hand, dancing with random groups of people. Some of them cheered when they saw me, others turned away in disgust. I kept looking for familiar faces, for any sign of Jack or Jenny, but I couldn't see them. More time passed. The last clear memory I have from that night is of the argument. Arguing with a group of strangers. I was swaying next to a table at the back of the bar, next to our table, and I was telling the people sat there that they were in my seat. They were all in our seats, that me and my friends had been sitting there. The strangers looked confused, and then annoyed, finally angry. One of the guys got in my face and told me to get lost. I mumbled something I can't remember and turned away. For a split second, so fleeting I can't be sure it was real, I thought I saw Jenny. I thought I saw the back of her head. The crowd parted and I glimpsed her on the far side of the bar, heading towards the exit. Then the crowd shifted and someone blocked my view, and I lost sight of her. I woke in the darkness of my bedroom, lurched out of sleep like a drowning man desperate for air. I'd been dreaming. A dream in which I danced with Jack and Jenny in the bar, screaming along the lyrics of some song, and now I felt disoriented, unsure what was real and what wasn't. I also felt awful. My brain felt like it had swollen in my skull. My head pounded. I could taste alcohol and bile in my mouth. My tongue was so dry I couldn't swallow, and my stomach was empty save for acid. I reached over to my bedside table, feeling for a glass of water, and found my phone instead. 3 a.m. The house was silent around me. I couldn't hear anyone downstairs, couldn't remember how I got home. Right then, I didn't care. Right then, the only thing I wanted was for the pain in my head to go away. I slowly pushed myself up from the bed and swung my legs over the table, kept in a half crouch to try and ease my headache. A fist clenched in my stomach, a warning sign. Moved too fast and I'd throw up. I pushed back the duvet and hobbled to my little ensuite bathroom, planning to gulp some water straight from the tap. Click. I switched the small light on and winced at the brightness. Over my head, the extractor fan hummed to life. Keeping my eyes squinted, I crept over to the mirror above the sink. Damn, I looked awful. My hair stuck up in every direction, and the skin of my face was ghost pale. My eyes were bloodshot. I was still wearing the same clothes I'd been in last night. The collar of my shirt was crusted with something yellow, what looked to be vomit. Some neon pink drink had spilled down my front. I reached out and turned on the tap, stared at myself as I waited for the water to go cold. Tried to remember what had happened the previous night and how I'd got home. As I felt the water change in temperature, I lowered my head, drank from the stream like an animal, felt the cold liquid rush into my mouth, smoothing out the sandpaper off my tongue. When I finished, I splashed water on my face, turned the tap off, and wiped my eyes as I straightened up. The blonde girl was standing behind me. She was directly behind my right shoulder, staring at me in the mirror. I screamed, slipped as I tried to spin around on the spot, my foot skidding in a wet patch on the tiles. I went down hard at my left side. Shock and fear burned my nerve endings. I scrambled on the floor, twisting myself onto my back so I could get a look at the spot where she was standing. But nobody was there. I stared around the bathroom, pulling in deep breaths, my heart pounding. She'd been there, in the mirror. I'd seen her. This wasn't like one of my drunken memories that blended into a dream. She'd been in my bathroom. But now, the bathroom was empty. I forced myself up into a crouch, and then into a standing position, crept slowly back into my dark bedroom. Nothing. Even after I'd switched the light on, banishing the shadows that lurked in the corners, there was nothing. My bedroom door was shut, and I knew I would have heard if someone had opened it. There was nobody in my room. Nobody had been in my room. I must have imagined it. Only I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't. Half an hour passed before I forced myself to climb back into bed to try and get some more sleep. I tucked my hand below my pillow and felt the rustle of paper. A single crumpled sheet that had been stuffed beneath it. All of that happened months ago now. Months since the game of Never Have I Ever, and months since I saw the girl in my bathroom. Months since I found the note below my pillow. When I look back on that night, I always ask myself what I could have done differently, whether I could have changed the outcome. There are a lot of things I think about, lots of specific moments and memories, and that note is one of them. As ridiculous as it was, as unbelievable as it was, I still wonder if I should have given it to the police, if I should have handed it over. But when I start thinking like that, the thought that always comes back is this: they wouldn't have taken it seriously. Who would have? Even I didn't take it seriously. Not at first. I guess I thought it was some stupid joke when I found it. Just something Jack had written for a prank. 7 little words scrawled on a torn-off piece of notepaper, a line running through them as if the whole sentence had been crossed out. Never have I ever met a succubus. Before I had a chance to give it a second thought, someone was banging on the front door of our house. Heavy, urgent knocks. I stuffed the note in the pocket of my jeans and went to answer it, thinking it might be my friends. But it wasn't. It was 2 police officers. I didn't believe them when they told me Jenny was dead. I couldn't. I heard their words, but they didn't make any sense to me. They didn't seem real. The officers said that Jenny had been found in an alleyway behind the bar where she was drinking, lying behind a dumpster. An ambulance had been called, but she had been pronounced dead at the scene. A heart attack, I found out later. They had some questions for me, and I guess I answered them. Questions about where we'd been, and about how much we'd been drinking, about who we'd been drinking with. I told them about the game, and about Jack. I told them about the blonde girl that had joined us. They took some notes, told me they'd be in touch, and went on their way. It was only after they left that I remembered the piece of paper in my pocket. I still have it. I'm sitting in the bedroom of my parents' house right now, staring out the window, and I can feel the crinkle of it in my jeans. Usually, I keep the thing tucked to my wallet when I'm out, so it's with me wherever I go. A reminder of what happened that night, a reminder of my friends, a reminder that no matter how many mysteries are uncovered in the world every day, and no matter how many crimes the police solve, there are just as many that they never do, just as many questions that remain unanswered. Like the question of Jack. They never found him in the end. They looked everywhere and they interviewed people, but nothing came up, just dead ends. A few people in the bar confirmed that they'd seen him that night, but that was about it. The CCTV in the place hadn't been working. The owner said it had malfunctioned earlier that day, and they'd been waiting to get it fixed. There was one couple who claimed they'd seen him later on though. They said they thought they spotted him a few streets away from the bar we'd been drinking at about 2 a.m, walking in the direction of a large park near the city centre. Walking with a blonde girl. But no matter how hard the police looked, they could never track down the girl. Jack hasn't been seen since. I still Google his name every now and again though, just to check. As far as I know, the case is still active and the police are still looking for him. So I keep checking in, just to see if anything new has come up, to see if there have been any updates on the search. But there never are. And if I'm really, truly honest with myself, I don't think there ever will be. I'm indoors indefinitely due to, well, the current global situation. But I'm not hard up. Actually, I welcome the news that I would be home for a while, because my work is both stressful and physically exhausting, and I haven't had a holiday in years. Same for my wife, who will call Eve. She's a proactive woman and highly self-motivated, both traits that are wonderful to have if you're working in sales. I've come to learn that these traits have made being isolated a bit difficult for her, and I'm curious if I could get a little insight about the way she's handling the downtime. We've been married for 7 years and have recently moved to the UK together. I'm British and she's American. When we first met, it was she who struck up conversation. I was quite content with being the wallflower, even though I did find her very attractive. I owe it to my English reserve. Being forward is a good trait to have for many reasons. For one, I'm certain we'd be married if it wasn't for her American upbringing, and two, her success can be attributed to her being unafraid of being social. Which is why I'm worried about her being in isolation for an extended period of time, and frankly, some of her coping mechanisms have been a bit odd. I never knew her to be a gardener, but she's taken to spending time in our garden, tiling mostly, weeding and beautifying. She's moved furniture about and found the precise location for someone making use of the chair to catch the most sun, what little there is, in a long sitting. She's also placed the plants in a way that they are receiving the exact amount of sunlight and shade as suggested for their variety. Beautiful, really. Her creativity has extended beyond the garden and has found its way inside, namely in our office. Prior to being furloughed and having to twiddle her thumbs for the foreseeable future, she would spend most of the morning and sometimes the afternoon locked away with her laptop, replying to emails at least twice a week. This isn't the case anymore, but she continues to follow the routine. I asked her one morning what she was up to, out of curiosity, and she smiled and said, "You'll see." As ominous as that sounds now, at the time, I thought she might be writing a novel, painting, or doing something ingenious. I've always respected her ability to make much out of little, and she had expressed to me her desire to explore her creative side in the past. Sales isn't exactly sculpting after all. So I left her alone and occupied my time reading, watching cartoons, or exploring intricate recipes. A few days passed, and I noticed that she was smiling more than usual. Don't get me wrong, she smiles often, but the happiness on her face seemed a bit unnatural, like she was struggling to keep it up. I could see that the muscles in her cheeks were twitching, and her eyes squinted as if she had been staring at the sun. I asked if she was okay, to which she nodded and said, "Of course." Mentally, I was also bored. I left the house once a day for my allotted exercise, and when I returned, she was still in the room. Slightly annoyed, but mostly curious, I knocked. I was surprised when she welcomed me in and saw exactly what she had been busy with. In the middle of the room sat an intricately carved cardboard castle. Clearly, she'd been etching and cutting the structure with intense care and scrutiny. I could tell where the pieces met. They all looked rather flush, as if bent rather than glued together, but the scent lingered in the air, and so I opened the window, which had been locked shut. As I admired the castle, I noticed that sat behind it were several steps, and on top of them were two figures, also made of cardboard, but coloured vividly. One was clearly her, with painted on blonde hair, a red shirt and black skirt. The other was me, shaggy, quarantine beard and all, spectacles and pyjamas. I asked her if this was some sort of skit she was working on, and she laughed before asking me to go, noting that it wasn't finished yet. I nodded and left her to it, my fascination with seeing the finished project growing. As the days passed, I walked by the office several times and caught her peeking out through the partially open door and could feel her eyes on me. Though, when I tried to catch her gaze, she quickly ducked away. Outside, I looked up at the window I knew she'd be at, but there too, she disappeared before I could catch a glimpse. I sat outdoors, enjoying the rare, warm spring weather, and waited. But she only left the room to join me in bed much later in the evening without a word. Today, I woke up after her. I hadn't heard her leave. I assumed she was in the office, but when I passed by, the door was open. I stepped inside and found that the castle and the puppets were gone, the window open and fresh air pouring in. That's when I heard the distant jingle-jangle of a tune, like one you might hear in a children's cartoon or at a carnival. I followed the noise down the stairs and found the music coming from the living room. There it was, the castle, set up on the dining room table. The music was playing from behind the gates, if you could call it that, and as I entered the room, it transitioned into a slow drum roll. I noticed then that a chair had been sat in the middle of the room, and I imagined that it was for me. So I sat. The gates opened, and out popped the two puppets at the end of sticks. If I squinted, I could see Eve's hand through the open doors, but a dark curtain kept her hidden from me. "Oh, hello there," came a high-pitched, squeaky voice from the puppet resembling Eve. It moved side to side as it spoke. "Welcome to Castle Eve. I am your host, Eve." "And I'm Eve's helper," said, me, in a deeper, gruff, comical voice. I chuckled and rubbed my eyes. "Today, we're going to demonstrate the proper way to wash your hands," said Eve. I rolled my eyes as I laughed. From over the top of the castle, a small cardboard basin was lowered. The puppet Eve approached it and tilted sideways, dipping her arm into the sink. Yes, Eve, good form," said the puppet version of me. Good to wash your hands and stay clean," said Eve. "You must stay clean during these trying times." "Yes, you must." I held a smile for a moment as the puppet continually dipped its arm into the sink, repeatedly. As the act went on, I wondered if I should say something. Several minutes passed of the same repetitive movement, and I began to grow bored. "I'm just going to grab some tea," I said aloud. The puppet stopped, and there was a momentary pause before the Eve puppet began to shake back and forth. "The show's not over yet. Sit down," it said. "Sit down," shouted my puppet for simile. I sat down. "Now, once you're done washing your hands, you have to make sure you clean your entire body," said the puppet Eve. "You're always filthy." "I'm always dirty," the puppet me responded, looking as downtrodden as it possibly could by tilting forward. I wondered if this was a personal jab. I do shower regularly. "I'm a filthy little person who makes the whole darn house stink. Come here and I'll wash you." Eve took me over to the sink, the two puppets hopping slowly across the front of the table. "Now, put your face right here." "Okay, Eve, whatever you say." My puppet bent forward over the sink, and as he did, Eve hopped on his head and forced it down into the basin. There was a struggle as Eve grunted and hopped up and down on the figure. The guttural noises she produced were truly artistic. If I closed my eyes, I could picture someone drowning. All I could do was laugh, but my laughter faded as the bit played on. "Get clean, you stupid idiot!" shouted Eve. "Get clean!" Eventually, the puppet, stopped moving, its cardboard legs pointing upward toward the ceiling. Eve hopped back down onto the table and a loud, content sigh escaped from behind the castle. "All better. The end. Goodbye." The Eve puppet went back inside the castle. The music started up again and the gates closed. My wife suddenly popped up and threw her arms in the air. "What do you think?" she exclaimed. "A bit morbid," I said with a laugh, "but, clever." She stared at me for a moment, and I rubbed the back of my neck. "Do you want some tea?" I asked gently. She continued to stare at me, and I could tell she was actually eyeing me from foot to head. Given I had just woken up, and I was wearing the same pajamas I'd been wearing for a few days, I realised how shaggy my beard had become and how unkempt my hair was. I had been due for a cut prior to the isolation, which I had obviously missed. I could see her squint in dissatisfaction, and I felt a bit embarrassed. I'm going to make a tea, do some laundry and take a shower," I said. "Yes," she replied. "Do that." I left in a hurry and went about my business. That was this morning. I've since showered, washed the pajamas I was wearing, and even shaved. I looked up tutorials on YouTube about how to give myself a haircut, but it may take me a while to get it down without simply placing a bowl on my head. When I went downstairs, the castle and the puppets were gone, presumably returned to the office. The table was clear, save for a sheet of paper which resembled a playbill one might receive at a show. "The Man Who Didn't Shower" was printed across the top, starring Eve and husband. I laughed nervously. How silly, I thought. I do shower. Actually, I noticed more writing on the inside of the pamphlet. "Coming soon to Castle Eve. The woman who gardened all day. The man who watched too many cartoons. The man who needs to clean up after himself in the kitchen. The man who didn't wake up. The woman who lived alone." We all cope in different ways. I imagine that this pamphlet is her own way of keeping busy. I know that this is a fiction she's created, but I can't help but wonder where these story ideas are coming from. I guess I'm writing this out because just a few moments ago, she slipped a piece of paper under the door of the office, clearly meant for me to find on my way to the bedroom. On it was a schedule of sorts, signifying that there would be a Castle Eve show again tonight, tomorrow morning, and tomorrow evening as well. Following, "The Man Who Needs to Clean Up After Himself in the Kitchen" is written, "Special Show." Also, this might be my imagination, but this afternoon in the garden, I noticed that the way the plants are arranged resembles a somewhat long, narrow rectangle. I kicked at the dirt below and it's all loose. Maybe she's planning on planting something, but it's a rather big plot and looks like it could be deeper than necessary. I blame myself for not paying attention. Maybe I do watch too many cartoons. Well, I can't say I'm too worried, but if you don't hear from me after tomorrow night, the puppets may have gotten me. I must go now though. I'm late for the show, and really, I don't want to upset her. As I lay the last piece of a broken cup to make a perfect portrait of my ex on the table, I knew that the quarantine was starting to get to me. I was never much of a homebody before the lockdown. My house was always spotless as I never spent much time at home. But now it was a cluster of many projects, finished and unfinished, that were snapshots of my sanity. The hobby started simple enough, baking sweet rolls, wholesome. However, supplies started running low, and I realized excessive cooking was wasteful on my necessary resources. Across my kitchen counter were various sculptures that I modeled from torn-up books that were gifted from friends. On the coffee table was a big papier-mâché figure I slathered together, all of which resembled my ex. I could tell that it was still on my mind, and the solitude was not helping with the process. I was doing well in life when I was able to leave the house to work my long-hour job, run errands, and hang out in the local tavern afterwards. However, none of that was possible now. I had not equipped my house for extended entertainment, and the remote location made normal commodities very unreliable. As I stared at the cupboards, supplies dwindling, the idea of leaving my house and getting stock kept crossing my mind. Except for one thing. The person outside. You see, my house has been boarded up, the doors barricaded, and the windows all drawn shut. Because since I've locked myself up, I've been plagued by a figure trying to get in. My ex, Sarah. We were supposed to be in quarantine together. We both were settling okay at first on the way to my cabin. She couldn't stay with the folks, so was forced to stay with me. But when she left me briefly to get a bag and some firewood, the person who came back wasn't her. Or at least, I didn't think so. I almost let her in. Almost. But when I felt something was off, I slammed the door and locked up the house. Since then, she's been tapping at the windows, crying, whining about being let back in, that it's cold, that she wants to cuddle. The temptation is there. It really is. But there's something off about her that I just couldn't place. And that night was no different. As I lay down for the night, my stomach churning from a lack of filling, the soft taps rang out downstairs. Sobs of sorrow echoed into my ears, a cacophony accompanying the low rumbles of my stomach. My sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it did, it was restless at best. When my breakfast was a tablespoon of oats in tap water, I knew it was time I had to make a move. The food supply was dangerously low, and as I laid the last ripped up tissue to make a perfect portrait of Joseph Joestar from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, now opting to make fictional characters to get Sarah off my mind, I knew my sanity was matching the rate of my food supply. The way to town was quite a while away. I often relished in the fact that I lived in a nice wooden cabin in the sticks, the cool snow painting my place in a scenic glow. However, the isolation now gave it a more colder tone. I had to pack more essentials than a townsperson would to journey to the market. I filled my pack with some waterproofs, a few necessities for direction, and some emergency snacks, and spent the rest of the time mentally preparing how I was going to do the journey. The trip was going to be an hour's walk at least, unless I could hitch a ride on the main path from some horse-drawn carts that bounced back and forth to the town. Something that was easy to do when there was traffic, but I hadn't heard wheels rolling outside my house since the town was put on hold. I knew the trip would most likely last an hour on foot both ways, The only thing setting me back was the thought of running into her. Still, it was either that or starve, and have to make the journey on an empty stomach, and I'd rather hazard my chances with a bit of strength in my body. So I prepared myself to journey out and stay on my toes. I pulled away the barricades and worked my way out. Outside, I made sure the door was locked, and I set to placing a few heavy objects in front, just in case. I didn't want any surprises waiting for me when I got back. After that, I made my way to the main path that led straight into the local town. It was an easy journey as long as I stuck to the main trail, a relatively straight shot which only diverged to other people's cabins. If you knew not to go down those smaller personal paths, you couldn't get lost, unless you actually left the trails. Even that wouldn't be a problem either, as long as you headed south. You could wander to the east or west a fair bit, and still be able to make it if you corrected at a reasonable point. However, a known rule was to never head north. North was the border to the neighbouring country. The guards there were rough if they thought you were trying to sneak across. It was very rare that anyone would, but they were paid to catch people crossing, so they made sure it looked like that, even if you weren't. With that in mind, I kept the simple rules at the tip of my thoughts and hastened to the path. As I navigated into the wooded area that surrounds my exit, a rustling became quickly apparent. Something was moving in front of me, and it was fast. I paused, trying to locate it, but it very quickly located me. From the brush slumped out my ex, Sarah, looking ragged as hell. "Why are you doing this?" she called out meekly. But I didn't give a chance to converse as I dashed away, trying to create as much distance as possible. She instantly started cutting off the path back, so I had to circumnavigate around to try get back to my house. My plan was to work my way around at a fast pace so I could make it to the back door, knowing the front was blocked off. I just had to hope I could push what was barricading inside the door once I unlocked it. But I never got the chance. Every move I made was met with a counter move from her. I shifted my direction left. She banked right towards the house, getting ahead. I would twist around and run back to the path, and she would answer in tow. It was a game of cat and mouse, but from the growing sounds around me, I was slowly losing. I tried, I really did, but eventually she was within a few feet, and I just stopped. So did she. Slowly she walked up, hesitancy in her steps, a different tune from just moments ago. "Why? Why do you keep running?" she whimpered. I just stared at her, a mix of anger and guilt coursing through me. It's true that I held a deep-seated resentment to whatever was standing in front of me, but seeing her face just melted it away. Suddenly, while looking at her eyes, I was starting to question my resolve. Had I just been locking out my ex during one of the most turbulent events in our lifetime? I stared at her, trying to figure her out. She was weather-beaten, that was for sure. Her clothes were pockmarked with rips from the wilderness. Her face was no longer smooth porcelain, but smudged and speckled with nature. She clutched her bag tightly in her hands, the object she went out for before she changed. I tried thinking back to why I thought it wasn't her, but my mind started drawing blanks. You're not her," I accused, a hollow attempt at getting a confession. Her reply was wordless, just a look of sadness washing over her face, leaving the ball in my court to explain myself. But I couldn't. My eyes darted around, the guilt causing me to lose my ability to maintain eye contact. I was wavering. Then a resolve hit me. I was going to interrogate her. "When is your birthday?" I shot, with a hint of authority in my tone. "The 14th of April, she meekly responded. Okay, I muttered back, unsure if it was right. She was my ex for a reason, and one of those was that I could never remember that blasted day. What's your favourite colour?" I spat out in impulse. Red," she muttered in confusion. A lightning bolt of realisation hit me that answer was wrong. Her favourite colour was purple. Was it? I found myself questioning whether I just misremembered that fact, since she admired both of those colours a lot. "Okay, how did we meet?" I tried again, with an aha tone mixed in. "Why don't we stop this? Let's just go back to the house. Please. I'm cold and hungry. You left me out for so long. I need rest," she pleaded. I could see sorrow in her eyes. I almost caved in right then and there. I was leaning forward to give her a hug, console her the best I could, given what I'd just put this poor woman through. When I looked down and saw her bag, it was just as beaten as the rest of her, matching the scars of her lonesome journey, and it was clutched in her right hand, along with the family ring she always wore when out. But I knew from the years we dated, she did everything with her left hand. I slowly looked up at her, her arms moving out into a welcoming embrace. The small mole under her left eye now sitting on the right, her widow's peak shifted unnaturally to the wrong side. She was a perfect replica of Sarah, down to the smallest detail. But the placement of said details were off by such a small degree, it created an uncanny feel, nauseating for someone who knew her. I took this moment of lulled calmness to compose myself, and ran away as fast as I could. I knew that once she started, she would always block the way back to the path and to my house, so I did the only thing I could. I ran north. It was a rough sprint. The wilderness thickened up the further I went, and I was almost over my head a few times, but the sounds of the approaching galloping behind me hastened my pace and kept me on track. I almost plummeted when I came out of a clearing and into an opening that led to a wide river. Across the wade was a small line fence that was manned by a few patrol officers. From the commotion, they turned and stared at me, contemplating the situation, and most likely, how they could get the most out of it. I didn't have time to ponder on that, however, as the galloping behind me was still rushing at full speed, howls of anguish shooting my way. In a burst of impulse, I took the human threat over whatever it was that was behind me and jumped forlorn into the water below. I struggled against the cold currents, but very quickly realized how much I overestimated the flow and was pulled around like a rag doll. The last thing I heard was the border patrol getting into position to apprehend me before I was tossed onto a rock head first.
Hey, you're finally awake. You were trying to cross the border, right? Walked right into that Imperial ambush, same as us, and that thief over there.
I suffer from cystic fibrosis. It's a disease that, among other things, makes breathing difficult. I was first diagnosed with it as a child after the first of many late-night emergency room visits. Living with CF means that while I have the potential to live a full and relatively decent life, it's nowhere near guaranteed. My parents were heartbroken when they got the news. Although they'd never told me themselves, I had learned that they had a hard time conceiving before I came along. They had tried every trick in the book: fertility drugs, dieting, specialists, clinical treatment. You name it, they tried it. 8 years with no luck, only to be delivered a sickly baby that wouldn't make it to 20. To say they did everything they could to keep me safe was an understatement. I was like a figure in a snow globe, caged in a bubble for my own protection. I know my parents loved me. They loved me so much it swallowed them up and ate them whole. Which is why I feel so guilty. Knowing that you're the root of every ounce of pain, every bit of worry and fear in your loved ones' lives is a punishment I would never wish upon my worst enemy. I remember our first visit. I remember feeling the tears fall on my face as my father held me in his arms, frantically screaming at the nurse for help. Even now, I remember how fast his heart was beating against my cheek. We already knew the postural draining technique was practically second nature to us, but it had never been this bad. My oxygen-deprived brain was struggling to keep up as those hospital lights flooded my vision. I was swimming in a fluorescent ocean as the doctors worked to clear my mucus-coated airways. Through the sea of white and the incoherent speech that my brain was working overtime to try and decipher, I heard my parents' sobs as they stood in the hallway, too horrified to look at me. All the anesthesia in the world couldn't stop the hurt I felt in that moment. This, more or less, would become my routine. I was what they called a frequent flyer at the hospital. I knew the nurses on a first-name basis. I even had dinner with some who had come to visit and check in while I was first staying there. I come to befriend the people who shared rooms with me. But as one after another grew weaker, I learned better. My life was split between pyjama-clad stretches at home and stints in a gown at the hospital. To say things were a bit dull at times wouldn't do it justice. Dreaming was my only escape. Sure, I had hobbies and things to do in the real world, but in the dream world, I was thrown into a new and exciting realities that I had absolute control over. Worlds where I didn't constantly have to be operated on, living lives that truly made me feel free. I lived a life where my parents didn't have to worry, where they weren't sad anymore. In lucid dreaming, my life was saved. It was the sleep paralysis that killed me. I had my run-ins with REM sleep hallucinations, nightmares that lasted full nights and visions that haunted me. It wasn't so much the images that scared me, it was the lack of control as your body becomes lead and how slowly time moves as you suffer that silent eternity. The first time it happened, I cried when I woke up. I vowed to never do it again as long as I lived. For a while, I was successful. As the days grew duller, the stints grew longer, and my parents struggled to conceal their bottomless sadness, I gave in. I crawled into that bed and let the void swallow me whole, just for a chance of escape. I wish, with every fibre of my being, I could have held out for just a little bit longer. Every day seemed to become a new challenge. Reoccurring lung infections seemed to become my new reality. News got worse. My lungs were fighting for every breath, and despite nightly attacks to my parents' hopelessness, no one could do a thing to help. As we went home that week, it was revealed to me that I would no longer have the privacy of my own room. Given the increasing severity of my attacks, my parents thought it best to sleep there with me in case the worst were to happen. I felt gutted. Now they couldn't enjoy a single night's sleep without my problems interfering and likely creeping into their dreams. As I saw them toss and turn, heard them talk in their sleep about their nightmares in which I was all that seemed present, all-consuming, all-powerful. I felt like the biggest burden alive. As I drifted off in that slumber, I wished for it all to just end. I didn't want to wake up anymore. I had just finished my reality checks as I slipped into that fresh dream when I felt a familiar pull. In an instant, everything seemed to be fading away. The ground beneath me seemed to give way as my edges became fuzzy. I was waking up. As the world went dark, my eyes fluttered open, and I was paralyzed once more. The room was dark. The only light that faded in seemed to be coming from the bathroom down the hall. I took a deep breath as I tried to steel myself for the monsters that always came. At least, I tried to. The mucus that coated the walls and passages of my lungs had blocked my airways. I was choking in my sleep. I looked frantically around my room for help. It was my mother's turn that night, and as my eyes fell on her empty sleeping roll, I realized I was alone. I quickly put two and two together and realized with a sinking stomach that she was the reason why the bathroom light was on. I was a prisoner of my mind, desperately trying to snap out of it so that I could call for help. I felt the veins in my eyes bulge as the lack of oxygen set in. The shadows crept in around me as the sounds of blood rushing in my ears was slowly coming to a halt. In that dimly lit room, as I lay dying, he came. From the darkness crept a tall, shadowy figure. He seemed to waltz into the room to the slowing beat of my heart. Although I could only see the rims of his eyes, I could see that twisted grin growing slowly clear as day. I could feel his sharp nails as he climbed onto my bed, slowly eclipsing my body as he did. Pain shot through everything he touched like static. His hand seemed to envelop me completely as his fingers gripped my flesh. "What's the matter?" His voice sounding as if someone had torn their vocal cords in every way possible. "Can't sleep?" With that, he let out a laugh and shook the room. His laughter sounded like nails on a chalkboard, mixed with a deep guttural growl that seemed to compound and echo in every nook and cranny of the room. Giggling, he craned his head against my chest and listened with glee, quietly indulging himself on my heart's final beats. Once it had stopped completely, he snapped his head upwards to face me. His small, black beady eyes sat in impossible deep sockets. "Uh-oh," he rasped. "I think it's broken." He licked his lips as he leaned in towards me, inches from my face. "Don't worry, I know exactly how to help." I felt his nails dig into my flesh as he hoisted me up and threw me over his shoulder, cackling as we ran into the darkness that engulfed us both. I felt his every step roughly collide as it hit the dirt. As he dashed, I felt myself slowly slipping from his hold as we moved further and further along. It hadn't been more than 10 feet before I fell hard and fast onto the sharp black floor. He stopped, if only to comically mine an overzealous "oops." I rolled in fearful sweat as I hit the dirt and realized I could move my body again. As I clawed at the ground in an attempt to crawl away back into the light of my room, I could hear him walking towards me, his pace quickening. I reached and took hold of a nearby branch to defend myself with. As my fingers wrapped around that slippery surface, I pulled it close, only to scream in horror. In my hands, I held what was left of a femur. The chunks of rotten flesh and dead skin where I had gripped it tight coated my hands as the maggots exploded outwards and crawled up my arms. I dropped the thing, but before I could react any further, I felt the man grab me by my feet and drag me onwards. Chunks of bone and flesh swam around me, and as we went, I felt myself grow sticky with the blood that oozed out as I collided with that putrid debris. I tried to scream, but whenever I opened my mouth, chunky metallic tasting fluid pushed itself down my mouth and blocked my throat. I coughed, gasping for air, as I tried to spit the gore out and felt myself get thrown into the air. It was as if I was inside a cone. Onward stretched on a warm red light, the floor seemed to curve in a complete circle and defy gravity for these creatures. All around us were more of these things, some dragging their own captives deeper into the light, and some deciding they'd rather feast on the less fortunate wherever they stood. The screams and groan laughter echoed on endlessly. That's about all I could take in before I collided with the ground, my skull slamming against the bile-covered floor in a whiplash. My heart was a piston threatening to burst out of my ribcage at any second. I felt the man yank me to my feet by my arm. I smelt the burning flesh before I saw it. I recognized them immediately. Inside that fiery hole was a mix of strangers and friends from the hospital. Here, I was reunited with the long-dead patients I had shared rooms with. The departed hung stone-faced as they dangled on hooks, needles weaving in and out of their skin like maggots. I saw old doctors of mine begging with outstretched arms to those who hung above them as they burned and writhed in agony. I couldn't take it anymore. I begged for him to let me go, to take me home and let me see my parents. He cackled as he pulled me close to his face. I realized now that his skin was a sickly grey, his body emaciated with two large, oozing holes in the middle of his chest. I could see the veins in his arms twist and connect along his wasted body like tubes. I stared deep into those black sockets as I fought for him to let me go. "But my dear," he grinned, "I thought this was what you wanted." He let me go and motioned to the suffering before us. "Here, where you're not a burden, where the ones that failed you and pumped you full of hollow promises meet their retribution. Here, where you're free from the pain of sickness, a place in all your dreaming of your own creation." I stood in disbelief, tears welling in my eyes. "How dare you?" I croaked shakily. "I would never, ever dream of this. Why in the hell would I ever make a place so awful? Why would I let such horrible hurt and torture ever happen?" Tears had begun to well at the brink of my eyes as he stared at me. For the first time, I saw his smile disappear. He stood silently for a moment as his face drifted in thought. "Nightmares," he began. "Our dreams too, child. Where do you think you went as your frail body was forced to slumber while their blades cut you open and tubes slithered and made a nest of your organs? That sickness is intangible, but its casualties are not. As you witnessed your friends leave in bags, did the bitterness and betrayal in their last moments as they were abandoned to die ever escape you? What do you believe became of all the resentment and anger you felt as those lab coats, in all their knowledge, filled your veins with false hope, only for them to slowly give up on you? In all your time awake, you drowned in anguish at the thought you were torturing the ones you loved most simply by existing. Is it that far-fetched that in a world shaped by your experiences and the invisible hands of fate, your true feelings would create a world that reflected your deepest desires?" Tears fell from my eyes as I stared at him. My knees trembled as they gave in, and I sank to that cold floor. If what he said was true, there was only one thing I could think to ask. With quivering lips, I shakily asked, "Am I in hell?" I watched as he kneeled down to face me. The screams of pain fell to a hush as all the eyes in the room fell upon us. Only the sound of the crackling fire filled the air. "No such thing, child," he whispered, slowly pointing a withered finger between my eyes. "The only world that exists is the world you birthed in here." As I felt that familiar pull take me back, he was the last thing I saw. As my eyes fluttered open and adjusted to those bright hospital lights, I felt my lungs expand once more. I had come to learn that my mother had walked in on the tail end of things. She had screamed when she saw my eyes bulge and roll into the back of my head, waking up my father and causing him to rush in. If he hadn't picked me up and driven me like a bat out of hell to the hospital, I wouldn't have made it. The nurses had dropped me onto the table and struggled to stabilize me and start my heart again. I was unresponsive, and the general consensus from the doctors was that I was brain dead in a coma. My parents had just finished screaming their heads off when I finally woke up. As they took me in their warm arms, they sobbed, blubbering about how they thought I had died. The doctors had called it a miracle. As any good hospital would, they nursed me back to health and examined me physically and mentally to see if any damage had occurred to me as I was transported and resuscitated. I had passed all the mental assessments and everything seemed normal. Everything, except for the marks on my arm. As the lab coats struggled to figure out where they could have come from, my blood froze. There, right where he had held me as he dragged my body into the darkness, stood the deep claw marks where he had drawn blood. I'd worked as a police dispatcher for 9 years of my life. It's a career that takes a level of mental fortitude that I don't think many possess. I used to hate saying stuff like that. Always thought it sounded so pretentious. But the truth is, it takes a special type of person to be willing to voluntarily listen to some of the things we have to hear every single day. Don't get me wrong, the job wasn't always grim, and it even had its decent moments. I've got enough decently funny drunk 911 call stories to last me several lifetimes, though the reality of the job was usually far darker. I understood that though, and felt that I was more than equipped to deal with anything the job could throw at me. I was ready. For a while. For years, I had answered every call, always able to keep a steady head despite being faced with some horrific situations. My confidence in my ability to handle the job unwavering. Until the final call I ever took as a police dispatcher. I glanced at the time displayed at the corner of my computer screen. 11:43. I yawned, leaning backward in my chair with my arms extended as I stretched my back. I had been at the desk since 3 in the afternoon, answering calls and dispatching officers as they were needed, which wasn't very often in this town. I lived in a little port town in Washington, about an hour or so out of Seattle, and though we weren't without our fair share of crime, our phones never rang off with a hook, which meant a lot of free time for me. I was always okay with that. As soul-wrenching as many of the calls could be, moments of respite were always more than welcome. A notification on my screen caught my attention, and in an instant, I had returned to my seat, headset on. 911, what is your emergency? I spoke into my headset as automatically as any line repeated hundreds or thousands of times can be spoken. For a moment, the line was only dead before I heard a reply. I need policeman. I think somebody is in my house, a child whispered from the other line. I felt the smallest knots beginning to form in my stomach. I shifted in my seat. Do you know your address? I asked, adopting a firm but lighter tone in response to the caller's age. I heard shuffling and heavy breathing from the other end, followed by a faint, "Wait." The caller returned and whispered their address. She was a little girl by the sound of her voice, and she sounded scared. Good job. What about your phone number? The process repeated, and I quickly relayed her information to dispatched officers. Her address was on the edge of town, a little out of the way, and I understood that it may be a while before help arrived. I stifled a sigh, not wanting to vocalize my worry as I received an estimated arrival time. Is there any adult with you in the house? I continued. No, the girl replied breathlessly, and I could hear the anxiety rising in her voice as she spoke. My mom works late, and my sister, There was a pause, followed by an audible sniffle. She's camping with her friends, and... Somewhere on her end of the line, there was a crash, then a scream. My heart dropped. Are you still there? Are you alright? There was a repetitive thumping sound, followed by the slam of a door. I'm here, the little girl spoke breathlessly into the phone. Are you alright? I repeated the question. Yes, was all she said, barely above a whisper. Her tone worried me. She sounded more than afraid. Sad? No, disturbed was the proper word for it. Then she began to cry. Not as quiet as you would expect given her situation, but a deep, helpless sob that made my heart sink. When she spoke, it stopped altogether. Please, please, please help me. Her sobs turned into a hysteric cry, and I could hear loud, repetitive thumps from her end. Footsteps, and they were clearly not hers. They were heavy, far too heavy for a little girl. Without warning, a shrill cry, like the sound of microphone feedback, rang through my headset. The sudden assault to my ears caused me to jump, and my heart set off to racing like a jackrabbit. I fought the instinct to throw the headset off and instead clenched my eyes shut as the noise faded as suddenly as it had come. I saw it, she sputtered through sobs. Oh, please, please, I don't know what it is. The frantic and frenzied nature of her begging increased, and a strangeness began to settle in the air that I couldn't quite place. A quick glance around the room confirmed that most of the desks around me were empty, and I was on the call alone. The thought made me feel very isolated, and a growing uneasiness continued to take hold of me that I couldn't place. Something about the call just felt wrong. The police are on the way, I began. I tried to infuse the statement with my usual level of assertiveness and confidence, but I worried that the uneasiness may be audible in my voice. Can you tell me your name? I asked. Amber. All right, Amber. Are you or can you get somewhere safe? A room with a door you can lock? I'm in my room, she said through sniffles, and it was obvious that she had been crying profusely. I locked the door. Good, I'm going to stay with you in the line. Is there anywhere for you to hide? The sound of footsteps grew in the background as her voice lowered to a whimper. I think under the bed, she whimpered. Okay, is there... I paused, thinking of my words before continuing. Anything you can use to protect yourself? There was silence on her end for a moment, followed by a hushed, yes. As she dropped the phone, I assumed to get a weapon. The clamour from within the house had grown closer to the phone, and the piercing, ringing sound had returned. I was almost certain there had to be something wrong with my headset or Amber's phone, and the sound grew to an almost unbearable extent, matched only by deafening thuds from somewhere on the phone. It sounded too close. I could feel the hairs begin to rise on the back of my neck, and the ominous sense of panic began to give way to an unexplained fear. The urge to look over my shoulder grew harder to fight, as the persistent thudding sound grew louder, nearer. It all sounded too clear, I guess. There was no static, none of the white noise typical of a phone call, nothing. Just the sound of footsteps approaching closer, closer. I gave in to my instinct, whipping around in my seat, nearly losing my headset. No one. I had no time to settle my nerves as Amber returned to the line. Are you there? She whispered, yanking me from my fog and back into the moment. Yes, I replied. I struggled to shake off my fears. Something was very wrong with the situation. Despite my worries, I shifted my attention back to Amber. There isn't a weapon, the girl muttered. But I have something. There was a pause. Okay, what do you have? I asked, realizing my prompt was necessary. A rabbit. A pink rabbit, she said. And even over the phone, I could hear a little embarrassment. My dad gave it to me when I was little, she sniffled. He said she would keep me safe. I didn't know what to say for a moment, but didn't want to miss a beat. He was right, I said, as encouragingly as I could. Everyone knows pink bunnies are great protection. Can you go back under your... I was interrupted. Amber, I miss you. I could hear a man call from within the house. So the intruder knew her? I furrowed my brow. Amber, do you recognize the voice? I asked, hoping she could identify the intruder. There was silence for a moment before her response. It sounds like my dad. Why does it sound like my dad? I blinked. What do you mean? That's my daddy's voice. Why does it have my daddy's voice? I didn't know how to respond to that. Hell, I didn't know what to think about that. had his voice? Before I could ask what she meant, we were interrupted by a sound. The thing we heard has taken me years to try to understand. I've come to believe it was that things laugh. At the time, though, we couldn't know. It was the sound of metal crunching in a car accident as it met flesh, a wet, grinding shriek that shook me to my core. I wanted to vomit, and my vision began to blur. I can only imagine what it was like for Amber, hearing that all in person. "Amber?" I panted, my senses returning to me all at once. She barely had time to respond before we heard it. A voice, or voices, calling from her from somewhere nearby. They spoke as one, all with the same odd, inhumane nature, dripping with malintent. "Amber." My blood froze. Amber began to cry, and her cries eventually becoming pleas, as she begged for help, her life, her mother, and my intervention. Five more minutes. Just 5 more minutes," I muttered, mentally cursing the timer which displayed the estimated arrival time of the dispatched officers. I prayed it would be soon enough. "It's outside the room," she whispered, her voice one of utter panic, before breaking into a quiet sob. I silently swore under my breath. "Amber, I need you to hide right now if possible. The police are 3 minutes away. Stay as quiet as possible." There was no response, but I assumed from the shuffling sound I could hear that she had gone back under the bed. For a few moments there was silence. Then Amber spoke, and my heart dropped. "I'm going to die." "You're not going to die, Amber," I began, worry now audible in my voice. "I promise." It's reaching under the door. Oh my God," she muttered. There was a crash, louder than before, and Amber began to shriek. The noises continued, and it began to dawn on me on what I was hearing. It was breaking down the bedroom door. Amber's screams had devolved into horrified babbling and pleas for her life to whatever was on the other side of that door. Her screams were soon drowned out by the same noise as before, that sick, twisted laughter. "What are you?" Amber shrieked, loud enough to make my ears ring. "Please, what are you?" "What are you?" it mocked, in a voice that was some sick parody of Amber's. Panic gripped me as I glanced at the corner of the monitor displaying the dispatcher's unit's arrival time. 1 minute 36. Please God, let it be soon enough. "Amber, are you there?" I called. "Amber?" As suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. Somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. "I hear them, Amber. Officers are a minute away." Silence. My heart began to sink. "Amber, are you there?" I could hear something shifting, breathing. I think it's gone," Amber said. A surge of relief rolled through me, and I let out a sigh and leaned back in the chair. 27 seconds, the dispatch time read, and the sirens in the background grew louder. "You did very well, Amber. Police are almost there. You did really well." I couldn't think of what else to say. I never had a call like this, and something about it felt so strange. Something Amber had said began to ring in my mind. "What are you?" "Amber," I began. "What do you see?" I was met with silence. "Amber?" Amber began to laugh. "Amber?" I said, my voice pleading, a wave of realization crashing down on me. The laughter grew more raucous and less human with every second. Somewhere in the background, there was a knocking sound. They'd finally arrived. Too late. I asked, the only thing I could think at the moment. Why? The laughter stopped abruptly as the thing spoke on the phone. It was fun. There was a click, and the line went dead. The house was empty when officers arrived. No signs of forced entry anywhere except the door to Amber's room, the bottom of which had been torn away by something, leaving a wide space to crawl beneath. And Amber, or what was left of her, decorated the room. Whatever had been there left nothing behind to identify it. Only carnage. The case was never officially closed, and everyone had their theories as to what had happened that day, ranging from serial killers to a bear attack, and everything in between. The call was never made public. Not my decision, but not one I necessarily complained about either. I never want to hear that recording again. I put in my 2 weeks' notice that same night, though I never returned to work after that day. I'd been content to try and forget about that call. As callous as it may sound, I was content trying to forget about Amber, to forget whatever I'd spoken to on that phone. But I don't think it's done with me. Last night I dreamed, or had thought I was dreaming, the sound of footsteps running throughout my house, as something screeched and laughed and mocked me just outside my bedroom door. I stayed in my bed long into the morning, despite the sounds having stopped, paralysed by a mixture of fear and confusion, until eventually I convinced myself to leave the bed. I crossed the room, cursing every creak the floor made under my weight. I lowered myself to the ground, holding my breath as I peered under my bedroom door. There was something there, but it wasn't moving. I mustered up the little bravery I had left and rose to my feet, my eyes shut tight and a prayer on my lips. I pulled open my bedroom door slightly and stuck my head out just enough to see what lay outside. I stifled a gasp and tears flooded my eyes as I bent over to pick up the object. Placed right outside my door was a little pink bunny, covered in dark stains. From somewhere within the darkness, just beyond the bedroom door, Amber's laughter echoed. When Penny asked me if I wanted to rent an apartment with her, I agreed, despite her ASMR obsession. We'd been friends since our freshman year of college, and I doubted that I would find another roommate on such short notice. The spring semester was just about to begin, and I didn't want to either go back to the dorms or pay for a place of my own. This left me with Penny, who has so many idiosyncrasies that she makes even boisterous TV characters like Sheldon Cooper look wooden in comparison. When I say that Penny is obsessed with ASMR, I mean she lives for that stuff. Every evening she returned to her apartment from class, she locked herself in a room and watched a menagerie of Tingle videos. At first, I thought this was weird. I thought that we were going to be hanging out more now that we lived together. But after a few weeks of her shutting herself away in her room, it didn't bother me anymore. I just did my best to push her out of my mind and do my homework, or watch Netflix. Then one evening, I awoke to the sight of her standing in my doorway. Her eyes were glued to my face as if my features were sculpted from gold. The intense look in her brown eyes nearly scared me to death, and I instinctively kicked off my covers. "Jesus, Penny," I said, voice breathless. "What are you doing here?" If I wouldn't have been so scared at the time, I would have realised that the real question to ask started with the phrase, "How long?" "You were talking in your sleep," she said. "Or whispering, rather. I wasn't sure if you were awake or not." "Well, I am now." My voice came up more aggressive than I would have liked, given my aversion towards conflict. Luckily, Penny is also easygoing, and let the comments echo into the walls without escalating the situation. "I've talked to my sleep ever since I was a kid." "Oh, I didn't mean to startle you. I just thought it sounded nice is all." She then turned around and disappeared into the living room without saying another word. A few days went by, and I didn't think much about this incident. Until that Friday, I awoke from a nap to find her sitting right below me on the couch. Her face was no more than 5 feet away from mine, and the pleasure plastered to her lips and eyes as they scanned my flesh almost looked carnal. I felt like the Penny that I had come to know and like had been replaced by a smiling Annabelle doll. I bolted up on the couch and fired daggers at her with my eyes. "Are you watching me while I sleep?" I said. "Of course not," she said. "I was just leaning down to pick up the remote." She brandished the remote in her hand. "You must have kicked it off the armrest while you were sleeping. I was about to put it back on the coffee table and go to my room. But then I heard you whispering in your sleep again. Your voice sounded so peaceful that it made me pause for a moment. Next time you hear me whispering in my sleep, keep moving," I said, not caring if my voice sounded aggressive anymore. "It makes me uncomfortable. This is the second time this week that I've caught you watching me." She shrugged her shoulders. "At least it hasn't been 3 times. She rose to her feet and sauntered off to her room, leaving me there on the couch to unpack the deeper meaning behind such an ominous statement. It wasn't until I woke in my bed 2 days later to the sight of her ear no more than 3 inches away from my mouth that I finally lost it. The image of her hovering over me like that, face racked with pleasure, had just been too horrifying. I could practically see her skin tingling from my breath in her ear, and felt like vomiting. The sight of her earwax-covered ear canal only intensified my nausea. I slithered out from under the covers and then jumped to my feet. "What the hell is wrong with you, Penny?" I said. Based on the wrinkles in her clothes, I could tell that she'd been laying by my side, listening for hours. Penny glared up at me from her spot on the bed, as if I just interrupted her favourite movie. "What?" she said. "I could hear you whispering from my room, so I came in last night to make sure that you were okay. It's no big deal. We're roommates, for Christ's sake. Doesn't that make us best friends? Not if you're going to sneak into my room at night and dangle your ear in front of my mouth. That's just sick. What has gotten into you? You don't seem like the kind of person who would violate me like that. And you don't seem like the kind of person who would whisper in his sleep. But I guess we all get lucky sometimes, don't we?" I stood there, staring at her for a few moments, mouth open wider than a train tunnel, trying to decide whether or not she was being serious. However, after staring at the carnal grin plastered to her face, I noticed the goose flesh covering the skin of her arms like speed bumps. I knew that she was being dead serious. The thought that she had been lying by my side for most of the night, pleasuring herself to the sounds of my breathing and whispers, sent a wave of fear so powerful crashing over me that I felt like fleeing the apartment. Instead, I berated her so hard my cheeks turned red and made a promise that she would never watch me while I slept again, then banished her from my room and went on with my life. The rest of the semester passed smoothly. I finished my finals, met my boyfriend, and most importantly, never awoke to the sight of Penny hovering over my mouth again. But then yesterday, I noticed that there was something taped to one of the planks of my headboard. This object was right next to where my head usually rests while I sleep, and I tore it from the wood, removed the tape, and then gasped when I realized what it was. The object was a voice recorder, and the light was glowing red. I yanked the voice recorder off the wall and immediately pressed the stop button. The red light vanished as if it were a fire snuffed out by a blanket. I then pressed the menu button and my heart nearly sank to my feet when I saw the dozens of recordings stored onto the device's memory card. Penny must have taped the voice recorder behind my headboard weeks ago and had been pleasuring herself to the sound of my voice in the shadows of her room ever since. A wave of disgust rolled over me like a truck. I never felt so violated in all of my life. To think that Penny, my quiet, shy, introverted roommate, could take her ASMR obsession so far nearly sent me to my knees. I scrolled through all of the recordings and pressed play on one at random. The sound of my whispering voice greeted my ears, causing my flesh to tingle. That the recording had the intended effect on even my own skin spoke volumes to how much pleasure these recordings must have brought Penny. The carnal grin that had been plastered to her face when I awoke to find her ear hovering above my mouth as I slept 2 months ago popped into my mind and made me shudder. I need to put a stop to Penny's disgusting obsession once and for all. What she was doing to me was sick and either warranted jail time or a psychiatric intervention. Before I confronted her, I needed to find out where she stashed all of her recordings. To think that all of those sound files of my sleeping voice might be stored on some flash drive stole the breath from my lungs. I needed to delete them before Penny found a way to hide them from me for good. Luckily, I had the apartment to myself that morning. Penny had class on Fridays, so I was able to sneak into her room unhindered. Her room was so tidy, it was uncanny. It was as if the entire space revolved around her tingle station. The sprawling computer desk pushed into the center of the wall, housing her desktop computer and 3 monitors. Why she needed 3 monitors to watch ASMR videos, I didn't know, and still don't to this day. I hurried over to her computer. Just as I was sitting down in the cushioned chair, I heard the front door swing open in the living room. Before I even had time to blink, much less hide, Penny was standing in the doorway behind me. She must have cut her final class and came home early. Her eyes immediately noticed the voice recorder dangling from the tips of my fingers, and her face morphed from confusion to rage. I had never seen her look so angry before. The sight froze my feet to the floor. Her eyes narrowed, and her cheeks started puffing with each breath that passed through her mouth. I hardly even recognized her. Long gone was the quiet girl who I had moved in with at the start of the semester. "That doesn't belong to you," said Penny, eyes glued to the recorder. "And the recording saved on it don't belong to you. I can't believe you snuck this into my room. Penny, I'm pretty sure that's illegal." She ignored me. "Get away from my computer," she said. Her voice was rushed and filled with anger. "Not until I delete the recordings you have of me." I was about to finish with the phrase and contact the police, but I figured this was better thought than said. I didn't want to fill Penny with any more rage than she possessed now. It didn't matter what I said next though. For the moment after I told Penny I was going to delete her recordings, she rushed me from behind and grabbed me by the hair. "Don't you dare touch my computer!" she screamed in my ear. I yelled as she nearly pulled my hair from the scalp. Pain reverberated throughout my body and was only slightly masked by the adrenaline now coursing through my veins like a serum. I did my best to wheel around and pry away her hands, but it was no use. She had me trapped in the computer chair. Panic filled my lungs. I felt like the hair locked in a grasp was about to shoot from my scalp and wanted to cry at the thought of the blood that would soon be running down my back. But then I looked down at the computer stored in the desk below me, and an idea immediately formed in my head. I reared back my leg as far as it would go and smashed my foot into its front. The thudding sound my shoe made as it greeted the thick plastic casing echoed throughout the room. "Stop doing that," said Penny. She released my hair and went lunging at my leg, leaving me an opening for a counterattack. I reared my arm back and punched her in the back of the head. I then jumped on top of her and rammed her face repeatedly into the ground until I could see stars in her eyes. After that, I sat down on her back and berated her. "What's wrong with you, Penny?" I should never have moved in with you. You know that you'll get arrested for this, don't you? You'll be in a cell in the county jail before sunset. Trust me, my dad's a cop. I rammed her face into the ground one more time for good measure. Get off me, she stammered, voice breathless. No, we're going to stay like this until the police arrive. I pulled out my phone and called the police. Once I hung up, an eerie silence filled the room, broken only by the occasional shifting of our bodies. Penny was the one who finally broke this silence. Don't most of the inmates sleep in the same room at the county jail? She said. I'm pretty sure they do, yes, I said, confused by this question. Her face erupted into a carnal grin. Good. I hope they send me there. This all happened on Friday, and Penny has been at the county jail ever since. I can only imagine how much fun she is having now that she has dozens of sleeping mouths at her disposal, all waiting for her ear to find under the cover of darkness so that she can rack her skin with so much tingly pleasure that the memories of her recordings of my voice, which are now deleted, will soon become distant memories in her mind. It was the advertisement's outright simplicity that caught my attention. Revolutionize science, earn $5,000, call us now. I wish I could say I didn't know why I called them. I wish I could say it was some act of God or deception that drove me into their waiting arms. But that would be a lie. The truth is, I called them because I needed the money. Because I had gotten laid off at the publishing company I worked at, and I was having trouble finding steady work. Because I was months behind on rent and facing my second eviction notice. Because I didn't want to be a failure. I called them for selfish reasons. Who are they? I'm not exactly sure. In retrospect, their obvious obfuscation of their identity should have been a red flag to me. But at the same time, their request seemed too interesting, their reward too vital, for me to risk losing the chance to help them. My best guess is that they're a group of private researchers that are funded by some super corporation. They must be, otherwise there was no way they could have been able to pay for the machine. They showed me the machine the first time I met with them. I was kept in a cavernous room in the basement of a 5-story office building. It was a work in progress at the time. They were still connecting pipes and soldering wires. But even in an unfinished state, it looked truly magnificent. Have you ever heard of a sensory deprivation chamber? I had. In fact, I had actually been inside one before when I was in college. Back then, I was on a real hippy-dippy spiritual journey. You know, meditating a lot, experimenting with psychedelic drugs, primarily magic mushrooms. At some point along that journey, I felt motivated to spend an hour of my life and $60 of my student loans inside a sensory deprivation chamber at the local spa. Your standard sensory deprivation chamber is a large metal tank filled with about a foot of salt water. You step in and float in the water. Then someone, a spa attendant in my case, closes off the tank so it's completely dark. With your vision obscured and your body suspended in the water, it's supposed to feel like you no longer have your two primary senses. Depending on who you ask, this is supposed to be relaxing, enhancing your creative process, allow you to reach higher consciousnesses, hallucinate, or maybe gain magic powers. My experience with the chamber in college was fairly lackluster. I remember that the water was too frigid and the salt made my skin itch. It was difficult to concentrate on meditating or channeling my inner chakra or whatever the spa had promised. Truthfully, I did always wonder what it would have been like to get in one of those things while tripping on some magic mushrooms, but I never had the opportunity. This sensory deprivation chamber didn't look anything like the one I used in college. This chamber looked like a vivisected suit of medieval armor strewn across a large metal table. Thousands of tubes and wires connected to the metal body which was about 3 times larger than my own body. The head, or helmet of the chamber, was colossal and round, with big brass pipes running out of its crown into the tiled floor beneath it. On the walls surrounding the chamber were 50 or 60 computer screens, 20 or so server boxes, and various iterations of medical equipment that I couldn't name if I tried. It dawns on me now that the utility bills and computers alone for the machines must have been many tens of times higher than the measly $5,000 they offered me, not to mention the salaries of the dozens of lab coat-clad scientists manning those computer screens. Again, perhaps this should have raised alarm bells, but I ignored it with the focused ignorance of a man who was on the brink of homelessness. The man who showed me the machine told me his name was Dr. Manason. He was a wrinkled, balding man with a clean shave and focused eyes of blue. When I saw him, he was always clad in blue scrubs and a clean white lab coat. Dr. Manason was the primary liaison for my involvement on the project. He explained the machine's purpose, brought me the necessary waivers, and answered all my questions. Questions like, "So, what exactly am I meant to do?" "We want you to remain in our sensory deprivation chamber for 3 days." I'm sure my expression betrayed my sense of shock. 3 days? Is that... will that kill me? You probably would still be alive after 3 days in pure isolation, though you would likely be gravely ill and suffering from immense dehydration. Regardless, the machine will hydrate feed and otherwise sustain you during the experiments, so there is no risk of bodily harm. Dr. Manason went on to explain how the machine worked. In your standard deprivation chamber, the occupant is deprived of their sense of sight, feeling, and to a lesser extent, hearing. This deprivation, this process of shutting the outside world out from the occupant's mind, decreases the burden on their brain. Thus, the occupant's mind is free to wander more freely, free to think more creatively, to undergo a deeper state of thinking, to meditate, and so on. But there is a problem with standard sensory deprivation chambers. Although the brain is freed from most external stimuli, the visual and auditory, the brain will continue to be burdened by internal stimuli. That is to say, the brain is still very aware of its own carrier, the human body. The brain will still react to the hunger and thirst of the vessel that carries it. It will still process both the need to and the action of urination and defecation. These internal interruptions go on, but the point is that standard sensory deprivation chambers cannot truly be said to deprive the occupants of their senses. This machine is not your standard sensory deprivation chamber. Even a cursory glance at the machine made clear what the doctor meant. Inside of the exoskeleton portion of the machine is lined with a soft rubber that would acclimate to maintain the exact temperature of human skin. The tubes and wires control and regulate a wide variety of bodily functions. Through these tubes, the body is automatically fed and hydrated. The unsavory functions of the body are handled with a catheter and other series of tubes. A respirator automates breathing and regulates saliva production. Even the body's natural sense of touch is completely removed while in the machine. This IV cord injects a numbing solution into the bloodstream that completely shuts off all feeling. The numbing agent is the most critical asset of our sensory deprivation process. The list went on and on. It became clear that they had truly accounted for everything. Even for me, I was one of hundreds of applicants to be part of the experiment. For the first time in my life, I was the first round draft pick. The scientist explained to me that I had been chosen for 3 reasons. Number 1. I had no prior history of mental or physical illness that would make my experience in the chamber subject to, quote, intervening variables. Their words, not mine. Number 2. My height and weight were close matches for the machine's original shape. Although the legs will have to be lengthened ever so slightly, you are by far the closest match to our initial design, they told me. And number 3, the most critical. There was nothing happening outside of that chamber that would lead to an early termination of the experiment. I had no significant other, no job, no living family members, not even a houseplant to take care of. They could breathe easy, knowing that I would remain peacefully within their contraption for the entire length of the experiment. Number 3 was important to the scientists. They had specifically designed the machine to allow for 3 full days of isolation. If the machine's process had to be interrupted early, it would take them a month to reset the machine and run the experiment again. Unfortunately, reason number 3 also meant there was nobody to come looking for me. The intake process was long and detailed. I signed what felt like hundreds of liability waivers. I listened to warning after warning about the potential side effects. Although it is apparent you have a clean bill of health, you should be aware the isolation process may be taxing on you. Our preliminary research suggests that disassociation, audio and visual hallucinations, depression, time dilation, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and other neuroses are potential effects. However, we believe such effects to be unlikely. They had given me several weeks to prepare for the experiment. My only requirement during that time was that I didn't substantially change my body weight or somehow develop bipolar disorder. Somehow, I managed. I spent those few weeks living normally, watching movies, applying for jobs, getting rejected for those jobs, and reading a few books. When the day came, I was nervous, despite Dr. Manason's efforts to prepare me. The process will come in stages. At first, you may endure a mild state of stress. We anticipate that soon after, you will drift into a moderate state of euphoria for the remainder of the process. You will be signaled a few minutes before the experiment is over by a short audio cue. This way, you will emerge from your state of sensory deprivation slowly and be able to reacclimate without any risk of shock. He played the audio cue for me, which was a short, musical clip of bells ringing. Then, with little ceremony or deliberation, I was asked to remove my clothing and climb inside the machine. As I lay down inside the exoskeleton, I felt the warm rubber against my bare skin. Even with the chamber still open, I was confined on all sides by the metal shell of the machine. Slowly, the researchers began to attach a score of medical devices to my body. I felt strangely calm through every prick of an IV and uncomfortable insertion of a tube. But as a respirator was placed on my face, I began to feel a foreboding sense of unease. As I felt my body being constricted and then held in place, a single thought filled my mind. Oh God, what have I done? The researchers pushed the helmet of the exoskeleton inward on either side of my head, sealing off my ears. The world went quiet. A bead of sweat began to trickle down my sides. Then I heard a voice, seemingly broadcast from inside my own mind. Hello, this is Dr. Manason. I'm speaking to you via a small speaker contained within the helmet of the exoskeleton. Your vital signs indicate that you are beginning to panic. This is to be expected. Please do your best to relax while we finish preparing you. I promise that the process will become pleasurable soon enough. Somehow, telling me to relax just made me more anxious. Before I could react, I felt the machine close around my body. Already, the numbing agent that was being piped into my bloodstream was starting to take away control of my extremities. I tried to push against the machine, but found that my arms wouldn't budge. I tried to scream, but the respirator held my tongue firmly in place. I was unable to move, unable to do anything, except watch. I could still watch as researchers scrambled around me to check vitals and prepare the exoskeleton to finish closing. I could still watch as a giant analog timer appeared on the TV screen above me and began to broadcast a time. 1 minute until deprivation begins. I tried again to scream. I tried again to plead to be let out. I found myself unable to feel any part of my body. I strained my eyes to try and get someone's attention, but no one seemed to be looking at me. 30 seconds until deprivation begins. Had my tear ducts been operating, I would have begun crying. Without nothing else to do, I began to pray that this was a bad dream, to pray that I was home in bed and not in this chamber. 5 seconds until deprivation begins. The last thing I saw was the face of Dr. Manason leaning over me, waving to me, saying something I couldn't quite understand, closing the exoskeleton's face over my own. 0 seconds until deprivation begins. And then, everything went dark. If I'd been in control of my own breathing, I would have begun hyperventilating immediately. I had never felt such a profound sense of darkness as in that moment, unable to see even my own body. It was as if I had been extinguished from existence. My eyes swam in every direction in search of a single iota of light, but found none. After a moment's consideration, I realized that I had now been in the machine for some time. I had no reference point for exactly how long. Without outside stimuli of any kind, my only mechanism of telling time was by counting individual seconds in my head. Yet, time ticked on. I found myself alternating between obsessing about my imprisonment and finding myself adrift in my own thoughts. I began to consider the state of my life, my recent unemployment, my lack of close friends. I felt a wave of depression come over me. Was my life really so meaningless that I could be snuffed out of existence for 3 days and no one could possibly care? I pondered the source of my isolation. I looked back to times I could have tried harder at my job. Images of friendships that I'd let fall apart out of introversion and stagnation cascaded through my mind. And then I came across the thoughts in my head that, were my body not numb to the point of immobility, would have made me burst out into laughter. I felt lonely. Well, of course I felt lonely. I was, at that moment, the most alone human being there had ever been. Surely there were researchers only a few feet from my terrestrial body, but my mind had been isolated completely. I was as alone as someone could be. I let my mind continue to wander. I felt as though I'd been in the chamber for hours at this point, although I had planned to spend this time planning some sort of creative endeavour, the great American novel perhaps. I found my mind repeatedly coming back to my current predicament. Obsessively, I thought about my body and the container that currently housed it. The numbing medicine must have been truly quite something. I couldn't feel the slightest wisp of breath passing through my nasal cavities or the rumble of my stomach. It was then that a pair of intertwining thoughts collided in my mind. Could I be dead? No, of course not. That would be ridiculous. I knew how I had ended up here. I knew that I'd signed up to engage in an experiment that would put me in this exact predicament. But I must admit, I no longer felt very alive. Without my body or the surrounding world as a reference point, it felt as though I had no assurance that I still existed. My thoughts began dueling with one another. Surely I'm not dead. This is exactly what the experiment was supposed to be. If you're not dead, then why can't you feel anything? Why can't you feel your breath or saliva or anything? But I know I'm not dead because I'm thinking right now. What does that mean? You know, I think, therefore I am. A smart man could have told you who said that, but I was left with just that proclamation from an unknown source as the only assurance that I was alive. As long as I was thinking, I was still alive. I began to picture myself floating through a void in space. The image was clear in front of my eyes. My body lay flat, my arms stiff as I rocketed past stars and unfamiliar planets. I watched my body weave past asteroids and through planetary rings. I felt the warmth of the sun on my body and the cold ice of the frozen planets on my skin. Except, I didn't really feel those things. I had to remind myself of that. I was starting to imagine feelings that weren't really there. I wasn't sure how much I should try to avoid those feelings or just embrace them for the duration of the experiment. Just another question to ponder, I suppose. There came a time when I realized that I'd been in sensory deprivation for a long time, Since I had not been counting, it was impossible to know how long. It felt like it had been days already. Had it been days already? That was a worrying thought. In a timeless void, 3 days stretches on like an endless millennium. They had assured me that I would only be inside the machine for 3 days. But how could I know for sure? Once I was inside, I had no way of getting out. They could keep me for as long as they wanted to. Maybe that was their plan all along. How could they get away with that, I thought. Who knows what all those liability waivers I signed said? I stopped reading them after the 3rd or 4th one. Maybe I agreed to this. You're being crazy. I don't know if I'm being crazy or not. I don't know how long I've been in here. So count. That was right. I had one way to tell how long I'd been inside the machine. Counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on and on. I counted to 60. That was a minute. And then I counted another minute. And then another, and another, and another. I just kept going and going. I never lost focus on the task at hand. Technically, 1,000 minutes was only a little more than 16.5 hours. Certainly not the 3-day period I was supposed to be inside the machine. But that was 16.5 hours on top of all the time I had already spent thinking about my life and dreaming about floating through space. Surely I'd spent longer thinking to myself than I had counting. I tried to guess how long I had been in the machine. It felt like it had been more than 3 days. I just kept trying to tell myself that I would be let out of the machine soon. I let my mind drift off again. My body once again floating through space. I watched it drift farther and farther out into an endless void of darkness. The planets and suns shrunk into oblivion until I was truly, deeply alone. In the black abyss, a creeping feeling of cold began to set in. Its biting sting spread up my legs and torso to my face. My naked skin turned pale blue and began to harden into a crystalline husk. As my body drifted farther into darkness, I watched the surface of my stomach crack and chip. Slowly, chunks of my body began to break off and float into the darkness. With each expelled scrap of flesh, a new wave of pain cascaded through my body. I found myself trying to grab onto my frozen body and put it back together, but my arms and legs were so cold that I could not budge. I tried to scream, but my tongue had swelled so large that it had filled my crumbling, frigid mouth. All at once, my body exploded into an array of jagged, bloody shards of ice. The pain was indescribable. Then I was, again, alone in the darkness, bodiless, without lungs to expel the panicked breaths I was so desperate to create. I had to keep telling myself it wasn't real. I'm still alive. My body is still here. Somewhere. But God, didn't it feel real? But it wasn't real. Real or not, didn't it hurt? Yes. Are you scared? Yes. Wait. Do you hear that? I listened through ears that were 1,000,000 miles away. A voice, not my own, burst into my head. Its bristly accent was familiar. Hello? This is Dr. Manason. I'm contacting you again via the small speakers contained within the helmet of the exoskeleton. I am proud to announce that you have successfully completed 3 days within the machine. I felt my alarm melt quickly into relief. I tried to smile, to no avail. At this juncture, we would like to update you as to the status of our experiment. The data we're getting from your brain scans is proving incredibly useful. The medical implications are numerous. We have contacted our institution review board and obtained permission to extend the experiment indefinitely. This is, of course, in accordance to the liability waivers that you signed previously. The machine should be able to keep you alive for a few more weeks until your body becomes unable to support it further. Do not worry. $5,000 nonetheless will be credited to your account. Thank you for your contribution. Your sacrifice will save lives. I tried to scream. I tried to flail my arms in protest and push back against the doctor's words, but my screams were silenced by my arms no longer part of me. I felt a deep, echoing hole of dread grow inside me, yet I would never truly feel anything again. I would die in this chamber. It would take days, and those days would feel like months, and those months would be torture. I again saw myself floating in an immeasurable darkness. There were no stars or planets. There was only my body, unequivocally alone, arguably alive, but inevitably dead. I stopped counting the seconds and just let myself float. My mind wandered again, this time for much longer. I dreamt of my childhood and of a future I would never get to lead. I made an imaginary bucket list and felt remorse for the boxes I had not yet checked. I held conversations in my head between old friends and lovers. And sometimes, I didn't think at all. Sometimes, I disappeared from existence altogether. But then I felt it. I felt something. I couldn't tell what it was at first. It had been so long since I felt something that I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or not. It was my big toe. My big toe on my right foot. Somehow, some way, it still had feeling. Not a lot of feeling. It felt like when you sit on your hand and it becomes almost, but not quite, numb. Like it was being massaged by a set of pins and needles. I moved the toe around, the little that I could, and tried to understand how this feeling had come back. Then I felt it. A tiny prick. The slightest droplet of pain against my big toe. Something sharp. An IV needle. It must have become dislodged somehow. Maybe one of those lab coat wearing schmucks tripped over it or something. All I knew was that I could feel again. I suddenly felt like I had been born again, like I had died and risen from the ashes. This needle must have been one of the needles that was supposed to deliver the numbing chemical into my body. Somehow it got dislodged, and now I had just a little feeling in my toe. Unfortunately, my big toe was hardly the vestige of my body most suited to orchestrate my grand escape. But still, I felt immeasurable happiness, because I had a secret weapon on my side. Time. There's an old adage that goes, if you give a monkey a typewriter and infinite time, he will eventually write the complete works of Shakespeare. Similarly, with a partially numb big toe and infinite time to think, I could craft my grand escape. My big toe was too weak to push open the exoskeleton. Despite my straining, I was unable to reach any other cords to pull them out. All I could reach was the IV needle that had been pulled out, and with that needle, I hatched my plan. I scraped my toe across it. It stung, but I knew it would do the trick. I knew that I'd forced those stupid scientists' hands. My efforts had made a cut in my toe skin, and now I knew I was going to be okay. They only had two options. Let me bleed out, in which case I would at least be free from this hell, or let me out of the chamber, at least long enough to reattach the IV. Either way, my plan was foolproof. Either way, I was going to be free, at least for a moment. It only took them a few minutes to notice what I had done. This is Dr. Manason again, communicating via the tiny speaker in the helmet of the exoskeleton. It seems you have managed to injure yourself inside the exoskeleton. After some discussion, we have elected to pause the experiment and correct the error. Stand by. The exoskeleton will be opening shortly. The light that soon flooded my eyes all but blinded me. As the machine opened, I bathed in the sound of its electric thunks and whirs and the conversation of men around me. The quick tug as needles and tubes were removed from me felt better than any touch I had ever experienced. They let me out. I was free. My body was numb for hours. The medicine prevented me from making any movements at all. During that time, the scientists left me in the exoskeleton as they went over data and bandaged my big toe. I tried to listen to everything they were saying, but found myself unable to concentrate. The bright lights above me burned my eyes, which had grown accustomed to perfect darkness. As the drugs slowly left my body, a dull ache developed in my joints. After a while, my body was hauled out of the exoskeleton by a team of the lab coats. I felt a dressing gown slip on over my head. I was plopped into a wheelchair, still unable to move. I listened to the roll of metal wheels as they pushed the chair deeper and deeper into their lab. Explain again about when you were floating through space. What was the sensation like? Please, let me go. I can't. You know that. The data we are getting from you is too important. Lives are at stake. And besides that, we can't risk you going to the police. You will be going back in the machine. This conversation had been going on for about an hour in the tiny interrogation room set up somewhere in the research group's massive underground lab. Although I had regained enough feeling to speak, I still found movement quite difficult. It was clear that as soon as I outlived my usefulness to the lab coats, I was going to be placed back inside the machine until my bodily demise. The data that the scientists had gained so far was so useful that they had no problem holding me against my will. As I sat in that tiny metal room, tied to a cold folding chair, clad only in a thin dressing gown, I considered my fate. For $5,000, I had sold away the rest of my life. My only respite now was that I could delay going back in the machine for as long as I resisted Dr. Manason's questioning, but I knew I was just delaying the inevitable. I stared down at my big toe, now wrapped in a bandage. Somehow it had not dawned on me that, even if I got out of that machine, the scientists were unlikely to let me out of the building alive. Not after they decided to imprison me until I died anyway. What if I don't answer the questions? The data we intend to receive from those questions is critical and could save lives, but if we cannot elicit it, then the information received from the exoskeleton will be sufficient. If you won't answer me, you will return to the machine now. So it didn't matter. I was already doomed. I might as well delay for as long as I could. Fine, ask me what you want to ask me. I answered hundreds of questions, most of them multiple times. It took hours. The scientists barely listened to my words. There was a recorder placed in the room with me. I'm sure someone would dig through my answers later. But for now, the conversation seemed to be mostly for posterity's sake. At some point though, I realized something. The drugs had completely left my body. I could theoretically move again. For now, I was tied to a chair, but they couldn't keep me tied up if they wanted me to go back into the machine. And from that thought, I came up with a plan. I knew I couldn't run immediately, or they would catch me. I would have to convince them I was resigned to my fate. When the questioning concluded, I found myself being hauled back into the chamber containing the exoskeleton. Perhaps assuming that I would flee otherwise, the scientists kept me tied up during transit. But the ties came off when it was time to put me in the machine. They stripped me of my nightgown and lifted me inside the chamber. I let my body go limp as they did, feigning the same numbness that had, until recently, restricted my movement. As I lay down in the rubber interior of the exoskeleton, Dr. Manason spoke to me through a loudspeaker in the ceiling. I am sorry that we have to part again. Your answers will be invaluable for future research. I know it may seem now like we are villains, but the research we're obtaining is invaluable. It will save lives someday. You are doing a valuable service to the world. As his speech ended, his researchers again approached to fill my body with needles and tubes. I was eager to make my escape, but I held tight. They would have to believe I was unable to move. I felt pinpricks in my right arm. I was already being loaded with a numbing agent. My time was going to be short. As some of the lab coats approached me on the left side to insert another IV, I launched myself upward, so I was standing inside the machine. Surprised by my sudden motion, the scientist on my left recoiled. I felt a sharp pain in my right arm as the IVs and tubes held tight against the strain of my sudden motion. The room exploded into panic. Men rushed at me from all sides. I felt my body moving as if on its own volition. My left arm reached towards my right and ripped a series of cords and needles out of my body. Blood sprayed onto the machine. My right arm fell loosely to my side. I propelled myself out of the machine and onto the floor, naked as the day I was born. The numbing agent had disabled my right arm, but most of my body was fine. I sprinted towards the door through which I had entered the lab, what now seemed like a millennium ago. I did not dare turn back to see if I was being chased. All I could do was run. As I pushed the door open, I saw a long hallway that led to a set of alternating staircases that I'd walked up and down several times while preparing for the experiment, stairs that I'd always assumed I would one day walk up for the last time. I pushed my body as hard as I could. I ran with my right arm dangling limp beside me until I reached the stairs. Behind me, the angered yells of men and the thud of their footsteps remained consistent. I knew that if they caught me, it was game over. When I reached the stairs, I practically jumped up the entire first flight. As I turned to climb the next flight, I saw that only 2 men had kept pace with me. Suddenly, I was filled with hope. Perhaps I could outrun them all. Then I would go to the police and get a chance to put this whole operation under the microscope. As soon as I was at the top of that second flight of stairs and through the exit doors, I would be free. My hopes were dashed as soon as I reached the top of the stairs. At least 15 men guarded the building's exit. Clearly, my escape had been a contingency for which the facility was prepared. As the men approached behind me and in front of me, I knew there was only one way I could go. The alternating staircase continued past the first floor, all the way up to the roof. I kept running, staircase after staircase, my aching body protesting each step, my dead arm banging against the stair railings and walls as I made my way up those stairs. The sounds of angry men filling my ears as I took step after step after step. Soon I was on the last staircase. A ladder hanging from the ceiling led up to a hatch on the roof of the building. This was it. I was going to see the outside world again. I didn't know where I was going once I got up there, but I knew I was free. I jumped onto the ladder and pulled myself up, about 6 feet into the air. When I reached the top, I pushed on the hatch. It was heavy and barely budged. I strained against the hatch for a moment, then felt a tight grip on my ankle. One of the men had caught me. He had wrapped his cold hand around my leg and was beginning to yank me off the ladder. I turned slightly and saw it was Dr. Manason. His eyes were red and as large as saucers. It was like looking into the eyes of the devil himself. I reacted purely out of instinct. My grip on the ladder tightened and I swung my free foot at the doctor's face. As my heel collided with his jaw, sending teeth and blood flying in all directions, I couldn't help but smile at the feeling. It hurt like you wouldn't believe, but it felt damn good to feel something. Dr. Manason relaxed his grip. I pushed upwards again and the hatch gave way. I clambered upwards onto the flat roof of the building. A thin layer of gravel covered the rooftop. The sharp stones poked at my bare feet. But I kept moving. I ran to the edge of the roof and looked out into the city. A beautiful horizon of skyscrapers and stars filled my view. I felt the cold breeze against my bare skin. The voices of the men behind me barely registered as I climbed onto the edge of the roof. I must have been a sight to the people walking by on the sidewalk below. A naked man standing on the edge of a building, staring at the horizon as if they'd never seen one before. "Please come down from there. You don't have to go back in the machine. We just need you to come down." It was Dr. Manason again. His voice was hard to understand now that he was short a few teeth. I turned away from the horizon to look at him. He was surrounded on all sides by other men in lab coats. I knew at that moment that I had no real choices left. Could I believe Dr. Mnason that he wouldn't put me back in the machine? Probably not. But I had no chance to escape at this point. There were too many of them for me to get away. Just as one of the researchers reached out to grab me, I took a step backward. As my body tumbled down to the earth below, I found myself laughing. It was just like when I was in the machine, my body floating once again. The cold air numbed my body, and once again, I couldn't feel a thing. Just before I struck the ground, I heard the sound of church bells ringing out. Hallelujah. I figured I must be on my way to heaven. No heaven came. Instead, I found myself in complete darkness, feeling nothing, seeing nothing, simply ruminating on my previous actions. Is this what death is like? In answer to my question, I heard a familiar voice. Hello, this is Dr. Mnason. I am speaking to you once again via a small speaker contained within the helmet of the exoskeleton. You have successfully completed your 3 days within the exoskeleton. Had I not still been pumped full of numbing drugs, I would have wept. We are currently in the process of opening the machine. At that point, we will perform a physical assessment. I am sure you are anxious to leave. I can assure you we will move as quickly as possible to make that happen. Thank you so much for your assistance with this project. It has been invaluable. 3 days. I had been in that machine for exactly 3 days. It didn't click for me until they were pulling me out of the machine. There was no bandage on my big toe, no needle near my foot on which I could have cut myself. The facility was nothing but accommodating in the hours after the experiment terminated. They provided me with a comfortable place to rest while the remainder of the drugs left my system. Although they asked me questions about my experience, they were not hostile when I refused to speak. The researchers were happy to answer my questions about the experience, happy to tell me it was all in my head. In the days following the experiment, Dr. Mnason made sure that I was provided with any mental health resources that I requested. He connected me with a therapist that I've been seeing for several weeks. The therapist has prescribed me an antidepressant which I take twice a day. I have returned to my normal life. My rent is paid. I'm seeing someone new. I got a new job at another book publishing company. It's like all my fantasies have come true. But no matter how long I talk to the therapist, no matter how many pills I take, I can't get the machine out of my head. I can't stop thinking about how those 3 days seem to extend indefinitely. But you're out of the machine. Your 3 days are up, I thought. Yes, but what? I was out of the machine once before, but that wasn't real. But it felt real. Does this feel real? I don't know anymore. Could 3 days feel even longer? Could I imagine a therapist, a job, a better life? I don't know. Sometimes I close my eyes and I become too afraid to open them, because I'm worried that when I do, I will see only darkness. I'm scared I will find myself still floating, motionless, amongst those imaginary stars.